Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Avalone, and I'm the Senior Manager of Patient Education Programs at the Lymphoma Research Foundation. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Drug Development and Clinical Trials for Lymphoma and CLL, SLL. During today's webinar, you'll hear from two speakers, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. You can ask those questions at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll aim to address as many as we can after the presentations. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and any question you submit through the Q&A box can be made anonymous. At the end of the program, you'll be prompted to complete a program evaluation, and we do ask that you please complete this evaluation as we incorporate your feedback into future programming, and we want to make sure it's as meaningful and helpful to you as possible. Before we get into the presentations, I'd like to share with you a few brief words about our organization. The Lymphoma Research Foundation is the largest nonprofit organization that focuses specifically on lymphomas and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Our mission is to realize the promise of science to eradicate lymphoma and to serve the community touched by this disease. All of our work is led by our Scientific Advisory Board, which is a group of 45 leading lymphoma experts from around the country. In addition to today's program, the Foundation has many other programs and services available for you and your loved ones. We offer both in-person and virtual programs so that you can continue your learning throughout the year. And to view all upcoming programs, you can visit lymphoma.org/programs, but I did want to specifically highlight our upcoming 2025 Educational Forum on Lymphoma. The Educational Forum is the Foundation's largest and most comprehensive program designed to support patients with lymphoma and CLL from diagnosis through long-term survivorship. The agenda for this program will include subtype and treatment-specific breakout sessions, as well as sessions on emerging topics like artificial intelligence and the current landscape of research funding. If you'd like to view the full agenda and register, you can visit lymphoma.org/edforum. In addition to our programming, the Foundation offers a wide range of support services. Our helpline has master's level trained staff who can provide individualized information on all types of lymphomas, as well as treatment options, clinical trial navigation, and connections to resources such as financial assistance. We also offer a peer support program called the Lymphoma Support Network. And through the Lymphoma Support Network, we can connect patients and care partners with others who have been through similar experiences for emotional support. The Foundation also offers comprehensive disease guides and fact sheets, which can be ordered or downloaded for free on our website, lymphoma.org. And please also look for us on YouTube, where we spotlight different lymphoma subtypes and treatment options. And finally, I'd also like to highlight our Spanish language resources for those of you who know someone who would find information in Spanish to be helpful or would find information in Spanish to be helpful yourself. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our program supporters. Thanks to their generosity, we're able to host programs like today's webinar. But for now, we have a wonderful program planned for you today. You'll hear from two expert speakers, Dr. Andrew Evans of Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey, and our very own Gina Aracena, who is the Director of Support Services and Patient Education at the Foundation. I'm first so honored to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Andrew Evans. Dr. Evans is the Deputy Director for Clinical Services of the Rutgers Cancer Institute and Chief Physician Officer of the Jack and Cheryl Morris Cancer Center and Hospital. Dr. Evans is currently the co-chair of the Foundation's Scientific Advisory Board, of which he has been a member since 2014. He also contributes to many other prestigious organizations, and his research interests include adolescent and young adult lymphoma, discovery and examination of novel therapeutic agents, prognostication and predictive modeling, big data, and patient health outcomes. Dr. Evans, we're so thrilled to have you on the program today, and I will now turn the talk over to you. Thank you so much.
That's great. It's really great to be here. Thank you so much. Uh, it's really fantastic. It's such an important opportunity to be able to talk about all the different medications and ways we're able to treat and hopefully cure lymphoma at the end of the day. And I've been charged with about 30 minutes or so on, you can see in the title here, drug development and clinical trials in lymphoma. Let me enter that. Can you see the slides? Hope, is that it?
Yes,
You got it? All
looks
right,
great. Yeah.
excellent. So here's the outline. I'm going to run through it. I'm not going to get real in the weeds, just a little bit to kind of run through some of the really key parts to how we navigate from a medication in the laboratory to hopefully FDA approved and able to treat patients for their particular lymphoma subtype. But I'll talk about just give some general background and then a little bit of 101 on clinical trials. Also mention, which still remains a hope, a little bit of a reality in terms of personalized medicine. And there are challenges, which can also be opportunities of clinical research that we have to navigate. And it's always helpful to see a couple examples of how did it work. I'll give you a couple of national clinical trials I was involved in, and then really focus on a few solutions because it's tricky. There is no way around it. It is tricky and lengthy timing. And so, but in the big picture, what is the purpose of clinical research and clinical trials in particular? Well, in simple sense, we want to lessen the burden of disease, and disease in this sense is lymphoma or CLL to improve patient outcomes. And that can mean a few different things ultimately to improve survival, to cure patients. Of course, quality of life is also very important as well. And there are many different types, though. When I said clinical research, I said clinical trials. There certainly are many versions of clinical research. There are people who do what's called epidemiologic, that's more like um, looking by race or demographics. Are there certain reasons individuals get certain cancer subtypes? Are there certain ways that affect survival outside of the disease itself? I mentioned quality of life already. There's certain ways to dive deep into what's called pharmacovigilance of different medication, ways it can be used. And then there's what's called prognostic and predictive analyses, meaning I might have a medication, I might have a disease. Are there other factors that I can predict ahead of time who may do good or what may work? And this is part and parcel to personalized therapy that I'll talk about in a minute. Just what about the spectrum? What is the spectrum of research? I've already mentioned this a little bit, but laboratory versus clinical research. And I'm here in New Brunswick at the Cancer Institute right now. And I can tell you that way is the Jack and Cheryl Morris Cancer Center that is mainly clinical. And this way is 100 research laboratories a hallway away. And you might hear this term of bench to bedside. When you hear that term, every drug that is ever approved for any condition, not just lymphoma, not just cancer, but cardiology, neurology, starts in the laboratory. Really, maybe there's a weird exception to that statement, but really starts in the laboratory. And there's different ways you get it. And it could be a natural product from tree bark. It could be synthesized from different computer models. But you study in the laboratory, you study in different cell lines. But at the end of the day, and usually that's several years, by the way, at the end of the day, there's enough hope, unmet need, and interest to say, well, gosh, that'd be great if we could have that approved, safe, and effective in patients. And that's when you bring it to the clinic. So when we say bench to bedside, take it from the laboratory to the patients. There's also, by the way, the reverse of that. Sometimes we take it to the patients, but then you want to take it back to the bench to understand how it's working or how it can work better. That's what I mean by a two-way street. And when I say genomic discovery, we know, generally speaking, one of the reasons anyone gets cancer is part of the reason, not the only reason, can sometimes be genetics. And sometimes that's you're born with genetics. There's genetics you can acquire over time. It's called epigenetics. And so we're able to do an incredible amount because we don't always know why, but sometimes the genetics get changed. And when the genetics get changed, certain cancers and certain lymphomas can develop. So not only does that help us in terms of understanding why it happens, but that also gives you a target. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Targeted therapy. But just stepping back and talking about clinical trials 101. So what are clinical trials? Sometimes patients hear clinical trials and a term does that mean I'm a guinea pig? And no, not at all. And it really is that first bullet, our hope with any clinical trial, because anytime we're trying to find a brand new medication get approved, or sometimes we'll already have a medication approved for a certain lymphoma subtype, because when medicines get approved, they don't get approved for all lymphomas. They get approved for a certain lymphoma subtype. If you want to get that approved in a different lymphoma subtype, so let's say something gets approved, FDA approved for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, but I think it also works in follicular. We unfortunately can't just snap our fingers and make that happen. You have to do a clinical trial. So even though it's already approved and we might have used it in millions of patients, you still have to study it and make sure it also is safe and works in follicular lymphoma. And so there's different levels and layers to clinical trials, but another way to view it is through different phases. We talk about phase 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Phase 0 is typically really early, um, and even before it's in patients, just to understand it's in the laboratory mainly. How does it work? What is it availability? It could be animal models that's involved. Usually, the first point of entry into patients is phase 1, where we're determining a safest dose and study. But again, there's different layers and levels to this. This could be a phase 1 of a new medication we're excited about, where we say it's the first time it's studied in humans. But then there's also could be a phase 1 where it's a medication that's already approved. We could have two medications that we use all the time, already approved, but we want to combine them together. And we might want to make sure the doses are the same. That could be a phase 1. So again, different layers and levels of phase 1. Once we are really understand that we think we have the safest and the best dose and we understand side effects, we then take what's called to a phase 2. And that's just testing. And usually in lymphoma, a phase 2 study is anywhere between 30 patients and maybe 80 patients, where you're looking to say, okay, I'm pretty sure it's safe. Can I get a sense of its early effectiveness? It's not definitive. It's not more likely than not going to get it approved, but it's just saying, how effective? Is it 30% effective, 80% effective? And then at the end of the day, many medications need what's called a phase 3 to garner approval, meaning most situations, not all, but most situations, you have a standard of care. It could be chemotherapy, it could already be a targeted drug. And many times the FDA will require that the new medication compares head to head. And this is where there may be thousands, hundreds, if not thousands, where 1,000 patients may receive a standard of care and 1,000 the new medication, or sometimes it's standard of care plus the new medication, to compare it head to head to prove that it's not only effective but safe. And then if it garners FDA approval, it doesn't stop there. We want to make sure, because sometimes, okay, great, it could be safe and effective in 1,000 patients, but maybe if it's in tens of thousands, we have a new safety signal or a safety concern. So there's what's called these phase 4 post-approval safety studies. And we're involved, every institution, we have all of these, Rutgers, and I'm sure at many, if not most centers across the US have all different numbers of these different phases of clinical trials. Really, at the end of the day, just trying to find anything and everything to find the best treatments for patients. And oh, by the way, Who sponsors any of these studies? It depends. Sometimes the drug company is the actual sponsor and they're trying to garner approval and they're shepherding a medication through phase 1, 2, 3. There's also, I'm working from bottom up, what's called NCI cooperative group studies. We're a part of a group called ECOG Akron. In each of these three major medical groups, these are oncology groups, there are hundreds of cancer institutes part of these groups. And sometimes all three of these SWOG Alliance ECOG even work together called intergroup. And what it really lets you do, and even community oncology centers are part of these. These aren't just academic centers, part of these groups, also community oncology centers. That's why it's hundreds and thousands that are participating, because sometimes there are rare, uncommon subtypes. And if we're going to garner approval, we want to do it quickly. We don't want to take 10 years to study a new medication. And the best way to do it quickly is do it together, work collaboratively. And the National Institutes of Health and National Cancer Institute help sponsor these group clinical trials where we do it together. And there's been many, many breakthroughs. In fact, the two I'm going to show you towards the end are NCI cooperative group trials. And then there's also ones called investigator initiated. These are the most interesting and sometimes cutting edge trials. These are what's called like I'm an investigator, where the university investigator has the idea. And the university investigator, whether it's at Rutgers or Roswell Park or MD Anderson, wherever the institution is, and sometimes it's not just a single institution, but we'll combine 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 institutions together and we'll do the science and the medication. Now, we usually need, unfortunately, is cost to clinical trials. And so we'll still need a sponsor for the investigator initiated, and often that is industry. But just to give you a sense that there's different layers, levels, and it's all good. And it's really just cobbling all of this together to try to find the best, most effective, and safest treatments for patients. I do want to give you a couple terms because in the era of quote unquote targeted therapeutics that I keep talking about, what we're have learned is you can sometimes have a targeted medication. Sometimes it's a pill that could treat, let's say, a solid tumor like sarcoma, and it because it targets a certain genetic defect in the cancer, and you realize that that different medicines may target that same cancer. And so sometimes it's called an umbrella trial where we'll have less lung cancer patients, but not just study one medication. It could maybe study 6 medications in one trial, but it's dependent on that patient specific genetic makeup of the cancer. So we're seeing more of these umbrella trials. And another term is called basket trials. So this could be where it might be one drug, but targeting a mutation, but this mutation is found in 5 different cancers. And what we find is that it works sometimes in all 5, sometimes in 3 of the 5. And what it does is, again, it makes us think in a targeted fashion, and we're able to do trials together in larger numbers with patients as well. And this is really semi new thinking in the last 10 years that we're able to do these group trials in a more really genomic, genetic, targeted fashion. Because when I say targeted, believe it or not, this is a schematic of a cancer cell from a paper published almost 25 years ago. And so even just in the turn of the century in 2001, we already had an idea. If you look, this is like the surface of a cancer cell. So we are already starting to map what's on the surface of cancer cells and what's inside cancer cells, lymphoma cells or any other cells. How does this help you? Well, you start to get a sense of what causes it to grow, but everything you see here in this cartoon is a target. And you can then design medicines to target what's on the surface or inside the cancer cell, either or both. And it just does it in a very smart, targeted way. And not to say that we still don't use chemotherapy, but chemotherapy just kills cells that grow fast. It's not necessarily looking at any of these targets. That's why there can be hair loss. Hair is a fast growing cell, or immune suppression. With many of these targeted therapies, you don't have those side effects because it's again in a very targeted fashion. And if you could imagine, this is 20 plus years ago, just the amount of knowledge we have of what's on the surface and inside cells that make them grow. And this was an interesting back in the day. So someone could say, what's one of the first targeted drugs ever approved in cancer? So this was a cover of Time magazine in 2001. So that same year that I showed you that other paper from. These are called Gleevec. This was a pill, and it was revolutionary to treat initially something called chronic myelogenous leukemia, which really was incurable, and you really needed a bone marrow transplant. There wasn't a good treatment. And this Gleevec has a 99% success rate, A. But B, we also found out it treats sarcoma. Totally different. One's a blood cancer and one's a solid tumor because it had the same genetic defect. And then you start to get Gleevec, and then you start to get new and improved Gleevecs. And I think this is interesting just to show you how much progress has been made. What's also interesting is if this was one of the first, one of the other first medications ever approved as a targeted medicine in all of cancer was rituximab to treat lymphoma. And it's hard to believe, but it's been around now, FDA approved, almost 30 years. Was first approved in 1997. One other important note I should make is when a medicine is approved, and in this situation, lymphoma, it's approved for not only a specific subtype. In this case, the initial approval was for follicular lymphoma, but it was for follicular lymphoma. We use the word relapsed. That's come back. So we had to do separate studies. Okay, great. It first got approved as a single agent for follicular lymphoma in 1997. But then we wanted to say, well, what about newly diagnosed? Well, we had to do clinical trial to prove it's effective and safe. And what about mantle cell? What about diffuse large B cell? Well, what about if I want to combine it? So every single step of the way is a clinical trial. And that's where just clinical trials are so critical for not just new medications, but expanding an existing medication in different situations of a particular lymphoma subtype, but into other lymphoma subtypes and other smart combinations. And oh, by the way, yes, do we have second generation, third generation rituximabs? We do. In fact, this is a complicated chart, list, I should say, not chart, of the multitude of targeted agents we have available in lymphoma, number one. And number two, what I can tell you is the Lymphoma Research Foundation had a significant role in essentially every medication listed here. Now, it takes a village with anything. It's the National Institutes of Health, it's the investigators, it's the companies, it's the lymphoma research, it's everybody. Not just garnering that initial drug approval, but also that post-marketing. You want to know, okay, is it great that it's approved? Well, now can I figure out who it works best in? Now, especially now that I have different options. The ones I have in the first box are ones that are so-called targeting the surface of the cancer cell. Remember, I showed ones on the surface, kind of what's called antigens sticking out of the surface cell. These are different targeted, whether it's a monoclonal antibody, what's called a bispecific antibody, et cetera. And then the ones on the bottom are targeting inside the cancer cell, different targets inside. And many of these we combine together. Most of these are approved by themselves, but many of them are also now combining them with each other, targeted plus targeted, or targeted plus chemotherapy, all different ways to smartly combine it to figure out what's best for the patient. But let me circle back to some of the challenges. And we just, we want it to be happy and blue sky, but clinical trials are tough business. And we're happy to go through it, and we've been doing it for decades, and we're trying to demystify it. But so in some ways you can understand why it's hard, because you don't want a loose system where an unsafe medication gets approved, or an ineffective, God forbid, medication gets approved. But there's just so many stakeholders involved in it, and I'm listing, the biotech. What about the institutions? Obviously, the patients are the government, many different aspects, and are there different entities that regulate drugs? Of course, there's the FDA. Of course, there's the National Institutes of Health. There's insurance companies I'm not mentioning, just public communities. The IRS even has a role. Medicaid has a role, and companies, universities, everyone's being analyzed and under the microscope. Now, this is one of they're trying to break this down a little bit, but under the current administration, but it's complex within the FDA. Now, some of this complexity is needed because you have gene therapies, vaccines, you have oral targeted ones. And so you need to understand there's different complexities to the FDA. This is a little bit of a busy eye chart. It layers not only the phases of trials, you can see phase in the arrows, phase 1, 2, 3, and that pharmacoeconomics is meant to be phase 4. It's layered into a time map just to give you a sense of how long it can take and the investment that it takes, because you usually the phase 1 is when it's entering patients. To the left of the purple, is preclinical. So remember I mentioned the laboratory and then the animal testing. That can be anywhere from 4 to 15 years before it makes it to patients. Now, obviously, we're trying to do it quicker, more sophisticated now. You don't want to rush it like anything, but ultimately, you have that discovery, preclinical testing, and by the first time a drug makes it to patients, you have long forms you have to fill out. It gets inspected thoroughly by the FDA. You have certain regulations at the university level, at the FDA level, the government level. It's obviously followed very closely. And then you start to go along. Hopefully it's successful. Hopefully it's safe. Hopefully it's effective. And hopefully I get it approved. And then it goes on through there. So just to give you a sense of the timing that it can sometimes take for certain medications. And I already kind of went through this preclinical. Obviously, there's different formulations of medications that can be used. I'm going to skip through this. And I'm showing you busy eye charts again, just to give you a sense of the complexity that many of us at the institutional local level have to navigate. If I have a meeting today with some of my colleagues and we are like, you know what? I really think drug A should be combined with drug B in um, Hodgkin lymphoma because of these X, Y, and Z studies. And so we might start in the upper left corner with a concept, and then we'll meet with the protocol team, and then we'll meet with statisticians, and then we'll talk to the company because it's believe it or not, it's expensive to do clinical trials. Some way to think about it when you have to, kind of pay to go through this process, it can sometimes cost 10, 20, $30,000 per patient on a study to be able to navigate through this. But we do it. We do it. We go through every arrow on this, and then you have the advisory boards, and then it gets activated. Then we have the institutional review board, and then the study's open, and then we have to monitor very closely everything going through. So thankfully, every university has systems stood up, research offices, clinical research offices to help us navigate everything. And there's, believe it or not, many more things I've not listed here that we have to navigate to open a clinical trial, to monitor a clinical trial, to close a clinical trial, and hopefully report out positive results. So now I'm going to show you two examples of that was a lot of the weeds, and now I'm going to kind of come back up a little bit and show you timing and a sense of how we did this. So I alluded to at the beginning, I'm as part of Rutgers here, we're part of what's called ECOG, NCI Cooperative Group, and follicular lymphoma is a very treatable lymphoma. It's one that we can't say curable. We can say we improve survival, but it's one that unfortunately, yes, it goes into remission and hopefully stays there for 10 years, but often or almost every patient that comes back. So we're always looking for more ways. How can we find more effective treatments and really try to find a potential cure? So the standard of care when we design this clinical trial, and you always try to come up with a fancy acronym, by the way. So we came up with Bionic. This medication, when we designed the study in 2008, 2008 is when we designed it. We didn't have as many targeted drugs. We had a medication called bortezomib, and we had a medication called Revlimid or lenalidomide. So that was our acronym. And the way we designed the study, it wasn't a phase 3. It actually was a phase 2, but it was a multi-arm phase 2. It wasn't enough to prove superiority, but the standard of care was this rituximab bendamustine, which we give today. Even now, it's a very frequent, if not standard of care, used for 6 cycles, and then what's called maintenance or continuation rituximab antibody by itself for 2 years. So the way we tested it was we wanted to add bortezomib to the first part in one of the arms. You could see the one in the middle, and then in the third one, we added the lenalidomide medication, a pill, you can see for a year to that continuation phase. And this was one that involved over 100 institutions across the country. The medications were provided by the company, the government, the NCI sponsored, paid for the clinical trial, or else we wouldn't have been able to do it. A and B, we also want science on the clinical trials. We want to know quality of life. We want to know more personalized. We want to know who is the medication working in. We want to study different aspects to know exactly who the medication is working in. And so just to walk you through, so you have to have a primary objective, and then you have secondary objectives. And so you design that. And then if you have correlative studies, you have to say, okay, well, what are those extra studies and what's a rationale and why are you doing them? How are they going to help us? How are they going to help patients? And we design those. And then, usually the protocol is 200 to 300 pages long, so it can guide anyone who's doing this study, so they know exactly the right medication dose, the right way to draw it. And you have different ways to do scans and details. And if you have quality of life, how do I do the quality of life? What questions do I ask? You want to make sure it's really a very close roadmap that everybody is following. And I'm just giving you a sense, very, very detailed, the way we conduct all of these clinical trials. And so we finished the study. Just to give you a sense of the timeline, though, it was conceived, or we had the idea in 2008. It took 2 years to get it approved after probably 50 different meetings, activated in 2011. It was open for 4 years. We ended up accruing near 300 patients. And it was, I would say, an okay result. It wasn't enough to say, we're going to go to the next level of phase 3. We showed that there was some effectiveness that was better, but not enough. And then there were some extra side effects that happened to one of the medications. And even though we were hopeful and it made a lot of sense, yeah, it really didn't go on to the next phase. And that, even though we had high hopes for this, and it made all the sense in the world, but before we designed it, that's why you do the clinical trials. Is it was good but not good enough, and that's okay. We learned it was an important one to do, and we learned certain lessons, and we move on to the next one to find what's the next latest and greatest. But we also had a lot of science come out of this. We had different PET scans. We had even biology to learn. So even though this study, as much effort that literally went into it, you can see it was 10 plus years of my life that went into, we're actually still looking at it. So more than 10 years, 15 years plus that went into the study. It's valuable information that's going to lead to the next breakthrough and the next study. So that's one example. Here's another more recent example. So this was in Hodgkin lymphoma. And this was looking at, now this was a phase 3 study. It was led by SWOG, some of our counterparts, Jonathan Friedberg, who's on the scientific advisory board, from Rochester, Alex Herrera, who's at the City of Hope. He's a new member, to our advisory board. He used to be a career development awardee through the Lymphoma Research Foundation. And what I'm listing here are all the authors of the real key participants, even though over 500 centers across the United States participated in this pivotal study. These are the lead authors. In general, number one, and also what I want to highlight through the lens of Lymphoma Research Foundation, all of the authors in either bolded in either purple or black are members of the lymphoma, past or present members of the Lymphoma Research Foundation. And it's really, you could almost do this for every pivotal study to show you how prominent the Lymphoma Research Foundation is in the vast majority of breakthroughs for lymphoma. And this is one example in Hodgkin lymphoma that I'm showing you here. And I was part of this study here. But the long story short with this study is we had a standard of care that probably broke through in 2017, 2018. The one at the bottom, brentuximab vedotin, and AVD therapy that was given for 6 months for stage 3 and 4 Hodgkin lymphoma. And without going too much into details, we knew that BVAVD cured about 80% of patients. Great. But we want to do better. And so we had a new medication, relatively new, that was approved about 10 years ago called nivolumab. It's what's called a checkpoint inhibitor. These checkpoint inhibitors activate the patient's own immune system to work better and stronger. And it's actually shockingly approved for almost 15 different types of cancer. And it's approved for relapsed Hodgkin lymphoma by itself. Great. But we said, why not bring it to the front line? Okay. Well, you had to do a clinical trial. First, you had to do a phase 2 to make sure I can safely combine nivolumab with AVD. That was done about 6 years ago. And then once we found it was safe and it looked good, now we had to go head to head with at the time, the standard of care was BV-AVD to Nivo-AVD. And we're hopeful, but you don't know at the time. You have to go head to head. And our hope was, could it be more effective? But could it also be not only more effective, but actually better tolerable? And so we tested all of this. And this was a chart from it where 1,000 patients across several hundred centers in the United States in a pretty short time frame, you can see 3 years from 2019 to 2022, half of the patients received the standard of care, BVAVD, and half received the quote unquote experimental arm. When I say experimental, meaning the new hopeful arm, Nivo-AVD. And it was an incredibly collaborative project that not only involved all of the different adult groups, but believe it or not, the children's oncology group. We worked all together, the pediatric and adult oncologists, because Hodgkin lymphoma, you can see really at any age of life, including at 5 years of old or 85 years old. It included everybody. It was basically, it wasn't an all ages study, but many ages were included. And at the end of the day, this is just a description of the outcomes, but this was a big winner. And the Nivo-AVD showed significant benefits in effectiveness, essentially across all age groups, the Nivo-AVD, but it was a have your cake and eat it too study. And it not only was more effective, we would have been happy with just that. And if it was the similar tolerability, but it was also better tolerated. And so it very quickly, and we published this in the New England Journal of Medicine last October, very quickly became a standard of care therapy for advanced stage. And this would not have happened without obviously clinical trials and without collaboration, and I'll say without the Lymphoma Research Foundation. And this was the publication. Alex Herrera was the first author of this paper. And you could say, that's great, but we're still not, we're always trying to outdo ourselves and do better, more effective, more targeted, etc. So it is exciting time. We have a lot of different medications, hundreds, maybe thousands of targeted medications if you include coming from the laboratory. But we have to be smart about this. So what is okay, great. I have hundreds, if not thousands of medication. Which ones are the best ones? And how do I do it in a smart, effective, seamless, and expedient way? We need good process. We need to choose the agents. We need funding. And we also need science to stay at our bedside. So it does start at collaboration. You've probably heard that word several times at all levels, at the university, the national, even the international level, and across all entities, university, government, foundations, obviously, and pharmaceutical companies. And the funding. If I had to say what is the number one barrier to great ideas making it to patients and breakthroughs, it's funding. It's funding. Having the drug supply is not enough. And so it's just so critical. And we're hopeful to maintain funding at the National Institute of Health. You saw that recent example. That breakthrough would not have happened without the National Cancer Institute and it would not have happened. I can tell you that. Because now the drug company's trying to get it FDA approved after we basically did most of the work. And that's okay. Sometimes it works that way. But hopefully funding to universities, funding to foundations to fund this just incredible breakthrough science. And I've already talked about it because, at the end of the day, there has to be subsidy because most clinical research offices, at least at universities, we all run in the red. It just is an unfortunate, it just cost a lot of money to run a clinical trial, but that's okay. Our hospital subsidizes, and it can be $1 million a year that we run in the red that our hospital and our university will subsidize. Some of it's through philanthropy, but some of it's through bottom line dollars that they'll reinvest in clinical trials because they're part of the mission and they understand how important it is on that. And so, yes, it's philanthropy. Yes, it's clinical system. Yes, it's med school. There are grants we still apply to the cooperative group as NCI and other groups within the NIH. And there are other larger grants we can apply for. And it really is cobbling all of this together so we can find the best medications, find the best science, and find the best breakthroughs for patients. And so, of course, it takes a vision and a plan. And thankfully, there's just so many smart people at the table. It takes that infrastructure. It's there, but not just infrastructure, but you need to be able to navigate that infrastructure. Um, yes, are there different opportunities and ways to navigate? We need that bench to bedside happen. And of course, we never want to forget about the next generation. We have great, smart, senior people who've been doing it for many years. Well, we need to make sure the young people, we mentor and educate the next generation, whether in medical school, residency, young faculty. We don't want to lose these smart doctors. We want to make sure we train them, keep them excited, keep them engaged. And I can say, thankfully, that's obviously a key part to the Lymphoma Research Foundation is training the next generation and making sure they're part of the puzzle and they're hitting the road running as much as possible. And let me finish on precision medicine. What does that mean? What is precision medicine? Well, this is, almost a Google definition, and it's kind of generic, but it is the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment that understands, integrates variability in an individual patient's genetics, their proteins, their metabolisms, their environment, and their lifestyle. Because even though we have targeted medicines, that's great. But very often a targeted medicine we just give to everyone. Well, what if I have 3 different targeted medicines and I have 3 follicular lymphoma patients? How do I know which one works? That's science. And that's where we need to go next. And that's where we are going next. And that's where the Lymphoma Research Foundation is understanding which medications work in which patients at the best time, at the right time, and really tailoring it to the individual patient. And it's easier said than done because we need, genetics are complicated, science is complicated, and there's a lot that goes into that fingerprint, that handprint. But we're breaking it down slowly but surely and understanding it. Will we ever get to your name is printed on this? I don't know. I hope so. It's not going to be in the next year or two, but maybe in 5 years, 10 years, we can get to that layer that it's not only targeted, and maybe there's three targeted medications in that one pill that's incredibly personalized and individualized. So, fair to say, I hope I've convinced you that, and you probably already realized it, that clinical, and when you hear the word translational, that kind of means bench to bedside, bedside to bench. So clinical and translational research is a critical component to improving human health. Are there many, many complexities existing that we need to successfully and hopefully timely navigate? Yes. Number three, thankfully, the Lymphoma Research Foundation has been and is uniquely positioned and poised to be a really strong force in clinical and translational research, as well as mentoring the next generation. And there is a viable path. There are viable paths for collaboration. We need to have great process, access to the medications, timely activation, working with the government, and at the end of the day, making sure we have the absolute best possible treatments for outcomes for our patients. And on the background, this is our new Jack and Sharon Morris Cancer Center. That's about 100 feet that way. I'll say thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans, for your excellent presentation with examples that really illustrate the value and the process of clinical trials, as well as the collaboration required for both clinical and translational research. So it's also always great to see just how many researchers involved with the foundation have worked together on some of these studies. And we'll take questions. I know we have a few. We'll take questions following Gina's quick presentation here. And speaking of which, I'm now thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Gina Aracena. Gina is the Director of Support Services and Patient Education for the Lymphoma Research Foundation. And in her role, she oversees the full gamut of our resources for patients and care partners. And you may know her if you've ever called into our helpline. Today, she'll be talking a little bit about our clinical trials information service. So Gina, without further ado, I'll now turn the talk over to you.
Thank you so much, Hope. I will go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, looks like we're up. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm here to talk about a vital resource for anyone whose life has been touched by lymphoma, the Lymphoma Research Foundation's Clinical Trials Information Service, or CTIS. The Lymphoma Research Foundation, or the Foundation, is the nation's largest nonprofit organization devoted exclusively to serving the lymphoma community. A huge part of that service is helping patients and their families navigate the often complex and overwhelming journey of treatment. And that's where the Clinical Trials Information Service comes in. When a patient is diagnosed with lymphoma, they and their loved ones are faced with a flood of information and a series of critical decisions. For many, exploring clinical trials can offer hope and access to cutting-edge therapies, but where do you even begin? A quick search online can yield thousands of results filled with medical jargon that can be difficult to understand. It can feel like trying to find a needle in a haystack. This is the challenge that CTIS was designed to solve. As the slide says, its purpose is to be a true partner in navigating lymphoma clinical trials. It's a service designed to cut through the noise, clarify the options, and empower patients to have informed conversations with their healthcare team. It helps turn a daunting task into a manageable process, ensuring that patients can explore all avenues for their care. The service helps patients, care partners, and loved ones explore these investigative treatments being evaluated at cancer centers all across the country. So how does the Clinical Trials Information Service provide this support? Let's take a look at the core components of the program. First and foremost, the most important part of this is that the service is completely free and confidential. This removes any barriers for patients seeking help. The cornerstone of the service is providing personalized searches. This isn't just appointing you to a database. When you contact the Foundation's helpline, you connect with a compassionate and highly trained team member who will take the time to listen. They can conduct a customized search for potential clinical trials based on specific crucial details: the patient's exact lymphoma subtype, their age, their treatment history, and even the geographic areas they're willing to travel to for care. The result is a curated list of potential trials that are relevant to your specific situation. This saves an incredible amount of time and energy that is better spent focusing on health and well-being. Next, the service focuses on understanding trials. Getting a list of potential trials is one thing, but understanding what that means is another. The helpline team helps demystify the process. They can provide information on the different phases of clinical trials, explain common terminology, and help you formulate important questions to ask your doctor. The goal isn't to give medical advice, the helpline never does that, but to equip you with the knowledge needed to become an active partner in your healthcare. Finally, the service provides information and resources to support you in having these critical discussions with your medical team. The ultimate decision to join a clinical trial is a personal one, made between a patient and their doctor. The service provides clear, reliable information needed to make that decision an informed one. Getting started is simple. As you can see on the slide, you can connect with the Foundation Helpline team by phone, which is 1-800-500-9976, or by email at helpline@lymphoma.org. I encourage you to write that down or take a picture of the screen of the slide there. The team is ready to provide personalized support and guidance every step of the way. To summarize, the Lymphoma Research Foundation's Clinical Trials Information Service is an essential free resource that empowers the lymphoma community to confidently explore the latest advancements in treatment. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Gina. And in the chat, I just sent the link to our page for the Clinical Trials Information Service in case anyone is interested. And in the interest of time, we're going to get into some questions now. So Dr. Evans, we've got a few questions here, and I think this is top of mind for everyone right now. How have the recent cuts at the federal level and challenges at the university level impacted lymphoma research, and how do you see those impacting cancer research in general?
Was that some of the cutbacks you mentioned? Is that the question? Yeah,
Yes.
it's a moving target is what we can say. I mean, you hear different things and we're waiting for the ultimate how much is being cut and what is being cut. Is it how much is in National Cancer Institute? Is it on the science bench side? Is it on the clinical? So it's murky at best right now. I think, you know, it's probably naive to say there's not going to be some level of cut, even if it's restored to some degree. And it's disappointing. There's no other way to say it. I mean, it's not only are we talking about, cancer and cures and, there's also, by the way, return on investment and just so much that's helpful to society through cancer clinical research. All I can say is that we're not going anywhere. We as the investigators, we're going to keep fighting, battling, thinking of the best ideas. I think if it does anything, it maybe puts, even though Lymphoma Research Foundation has been just such an incredible partner on the science, the education, everything we've talked about, probably amplifies a little more the importance of the foundation and the work that they're doing, and probably a little more on philanthropy, to be honest, where maybe philanthropy in the past was maybe extra or icing on the cake. It's going to be part of the cake now. It's we're going to need to rely on it even a little bit more in some ways. I know the foundation is incredibly committed and looking under every stone to do what they can, not only in their house, but also to try and influence on the Hill and to really convince the government of the importance of investing in cancer research and lymphoma in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Evans. And to kind of add on to what you said, the foundation does not receive or rely on federal funding. So like you said, our work is going to continue uninterrupted, and we're doing our best to fill any gaps for the scientific community due to any changes in policy. And of course, the support of our community is critical in doing so. And I want to again note that during the educational forum in September, we have a dedicated session that will explore changes in the research landscape and also explore how patients and care partners can stay informed and engaged during this time. So we highly encourage anyone interested to register for the Ed Forum and to tune in as well. And I can send the link in the chat to do so. Getting into some other questions here, Dr. Evans, I know someone had asked at the top, if I enroll in a clinical trial, do I have to stop seeing my regular oncologist?
Yeah, not necessarily, although it depends. It's one thing we need to do a better job of make clinical trials easier. And so I'll just give an example of our health system. So I'm in New Brunswick. We have a health system called RWJ Barnabas Health. It's 15 hospitals. We're at the academic center. Here at the academic center in New Brunswick, we have north of 200 different clinical trials. Of the other 14 hospitals throughout the state of New Jersey, some are big community hospitals, some are little ones. They actually have access to all 200, but they're not as busy as us. They don't have the structure, so they won't open 200 studies. They might open 30 studies, 50 studies for their that they think are important. So what we'll do is sometimes that local oncologist might be 20 minutes away, an hour, will refer a patient because they know we have access to a cutting edge clinical trial. And so sometimes, partly out of safety, the patient temporarily will be under our care at the academic center, but we still collaborate with the local. We share the care. They might get the key medication with us, but they'll do some of the other treatment close to home with their oncologist. So we're very sensitive to that. What we're also trying to do, if it makes sense, is, well, can they open that study locally? It takes some time. We've set up a system where instead of it taking a year to open, it can happen in a few weeks. And I know many other systems across the country, not just here in New Jersey, are trying to do that. So we sometimes they might have to temporarily transfer care, but our hope and goal is to do as much cancer care and, if possible, clinical trials close to home.
Thank you so much for speaking a little bit to that. The next question here is, do you see any trials investigating integrative or non-traditional treatments in combination with traditional therapies?
Yeah, 100%. You name it. If there's something that can help patients, we're all over it. The companies, we're whether traditional, non-traditional, integrative, yes. So the quick answer, yes. With that said, so what are barriers? Well, we need to make sure we know, what are we studying? Is it acupuncture? Is it a vitamin? So we need to understand, what is it? You need a control for it. Number one. One of the barriers, though, comes back to funding for that. And I'll say that's just maybe a barrier, an opportunity, and is there, because at the end of the day, if it can cost $10,000, $20,000 per patient on a study, which is just all the regulatory and all the costs, and you have 30 patients, at the end of the day, there has to be funding for that. And so I know the foundation is open, has a very open mind. When they are funding research, they don't say it has to be a drug clinical trial. It just has to be a clinical trial that helps patients. So I think we're all ears, all eyes, and very interested on anything that can help patients.
Thank you. And we're going to take, I think, just two more questions here before we wrap up. First, what is done with global partners, such as in the UK, to encourage education, trials, research, etc.?
Yeah, I'll just say an incredible amount is, I'll say, just like funding cuts, there have been restrictions on international collaborations. It just is what it is. We're trying to navigate that. But despite that recent barrier that's popped up from the government, is there is so much worldwide collaboration going on. Um, you know, me personally, and I know many of the colleagues on the Lymphoma Research Foundation Scientific Advisory Board, we have so many collaborations and consortiums that are worldwide. And it is power in numbers. It is a think tank. And, there's really good lymphoma care in Germany and France and Italy. And we work very closely together, whether it's clinical trial, whether it's science, where we're able to do it. Sometimes funding, again, can be a barrier, but a lot of this happens at the global level.
Thank you. And our final question for today is, are there any clinical trials looking into CAR T-cell therapy as a frontline treatment for lymphoma?
Yeah, you betcha. There really are. Now we have to do it smartly because CAR T is even though it's exciting, interesting, innovative treatment, it's a strong treatment. There are side effects to CAR T. The good news is there are so many different CARs. There are a handful now that are commercially approved. I can tell you there's about 50 in clinical trials because right now the CARs are to CD19. There's now double CARs and even triple CARs that are like to 3 different targets. Same thing with bispecific antibodies, duals and tris. And that's where I said it's an exciting time. There are so many medications. In a good way, that's not the barrier. It really now is, do we have the science to understand which are the best ones and the funding and the process? So yes, there are just so many excitement on the targeted trials, in particular immunotherapy like CARs.
Certainly a lot of interest in that area from patients. So thank you so much, Dr. Evans, for your time today. And of course, thank you, Gina, for your time as well. And I, of course, want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. Please remember, if you have any additional questions or if you'd like to be connected with someone else who has been impacted by lymphoma, you can reach out to our helpline at 800-500-9976 or at helpline@lymphoma.org. And I also sent that information in the chat. And with that, thank you again, Dr. Evans and Gina, and I hope you both have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye.